specifically for thanks, for the agricultural land easements portion of the program. We are not talking about any other NRCS programs. We're not talking about the wetlands reserve easements. That's the other portion of the ACEP program. So I apologize for the acronyms in advance, but the acronym I'll mainly be using today is IRA ACEP-ALE. So we can move on here. So again, this workshop is being recorded and will be available online on our Coalition of Oregon Land Trust webpage. And I'm hoping to also get it posted to the NRCS webpage as well. So you're welcome to stay on or off camera, whichever you prefer. And questions can be put in the chat. We'll have time in the middle for questions and then time at the end as well. It's just a little hard to see the chat, so we'll have some explicit time for Q&A. So the topics I'll be covering today primarily is the context, priorities, and application timeline for IRA ACEP-ALE. Also describe a little bit about the ranking criteria. We'll be talking about how to submit an application and then share any resources that are available. And then we'll have Q&A mostly at the end, but like I said, we'll pause in the middle. So let's first talk about the IRA ACEP-ALE context. To zoom out, the ACEP-ALE program provides up to 50% of cost share for assistance for the purchase of agricultural conservation easements. And there is also a program option within ACEP-ALE called GSS, or Grasslands of Special Environmental Significance, by which NRCS can provide up to 75% of a cost share for the purchase of an easement that meets specific GSS eligibility. And just to note that GSS is available with the IRA ACEP-ALE pot of funding as well. So that's kind of the big context. Specifically about IRA, the IRA provides additional funding, but it's a separate pot of funding for ACEP-ALE. So there we have a general ACEP-ALE pot of funding and an IRA pot of funding. Prior to this current fiscal year, which starts on October 1st for the federal fiscal year, prior to this fiscal year, it previously prioritized Midwestern states, but now the funding is available in all states. So that's why it's here now. And there will be roughly $6.5 million is the number that I've heard allocated to Oregon for IRA ACEP in fiscal year 25. And I have not heard if there is a split between the ALE component, which we are talking about today, and the wetlands reserve easements. So generally that $6.5 million is available for the ACEP program overall. I also want to zoom out and give a picture of what could come down the pipeline. And that's to note that IRA funding is to be spent nationally by 2031. So Oregon should continue to receive annual funding allocations unless the following occurs, which one is that the IRA funding funds are spent nationwide prior to 2031. Another possible scenario is that applications that are received in Oregon are unsuccessful or basically unfunded. So any of this unused or leftover IRA-specific state funding then gets returned to national each year. So as a result, national may use this information to reduce or reallocate Oregon's IRA-specific funding in future years. And that, of course, is not an ideal scenario for any of us. So we are going to try our best to get the best information out there to get the best applications into the system. So for the priorities specific to IRA ACEP-ALE, the IRA applications, they have to meet, in addition to general ACEP-ALE program eligibility, they have to meet one of the following two priorities that are applicable here in Oregon. One of those priorities being that program eligible ag lands currently classified as a grassland or native vegetation NRCS has identified a high threat of conversion to non-grassland use. And another priority that it may need to meet is that program eligible cropland or grassland where NRCS has identified a high threat of conversion to non-ag use. So I would also welcome and encourage any entities to discuss project fit prior to applying with the NRCS Oregon team staff in a moment, but you're welcome to reach out to me and we can go over if your potential project is a good fit for either this fiscal year or in upcoming fiscal years as well. So on the application timeline, we have two cutoff dates that are set by national to accept applications. The first date is set as October 4th, 2024, which is very early in the fiscal year and coming up rather soon, which is why we put this together as quickly as we could. And then there's a second application date, and that will have the same application materials as the first round as well. There is not necessarily in guidance any reason why one is better, but what I have been recommended is that is first come, first serve funding. So it's best to get your applications early, so the October 4th, which is rather soon again. If not, it will be considered for the December 20th if you submit anything after October 4th. I also want to share about some internal deadlines that NRCS has to meet to rank and tentatively select projects. So by December 13th, NRCS Oregon is required to have applications, as I mentioned, ranked and tentatively selected for the first round. And then for the second round, those applications have to be ranked and tentatively selected by February 7th. So you should hear more information about your project after those dates. So let's talk about the IRA specific ranking criteria. First, I want to show where the ranking criteria is available. It's publicly available on the NRCS Oregon webpage, linked here. And if you scroll down on that page, you will find the Oregon specific section. And then in this green box here is a PDF ranking report, which I'll go over on the next slides. So IRA ACEP-ALE uses ranking criteria determined both at the NRCS national level and at the NRCS Oregon level, really to help identify and fund the best applications that are meeting program priorities. The national criteria total a highest possible of 275 points, and the state criteria have a highest possible total of 125 points. So an application could potentially get 400 points at the highest amount there. And I do want to note that applications that are submitted in Oregon to NRCS Oregon are only ranked against other IRA ACEP-ALE applications in Oregon. This is not a nationwide competition for funding. That question has been floating around, and I believe that was part of the process in previous fiscal years for the other states. But now the guidance is that only applications submitted within a state are considered within that state and are competing against each other. So I've included some screenshots here of the ranking criteria. This is that PDF I was referring to on a couple of slides ago. So the national ranking criteria is featured on pages 5 through 7 under the program section. And so you have page 5 on the right here. We'll go to page 6 and 7 in a second. But I also wanted to note that the national ranking criteria is almost relatively the same as general ACEP-ALE. However, they have added 2 questions that are highlighted on the upcoming slides that are specific to IRA ACEP-ALE, and I'll explain those in a moment. And again, this is kind of zooming out here. If you have never seen ranking criteria or really understand what we use or what's going on with this PDF here, All these ranking criteria are turned into more accessible questions that are featured on what's called a parcel application packet. I'll talk more about that later in the slide, but you're not necessarily using this PDF directly and like checking a box. These are all questions that get adapted into a more accessible format. And I'm just going to breeze through. This is page 6 here of the PDF. And then this is page 7 where those new IRA specific criteria are highlighted. So National has added that the proposed easement is in an area with a threat of conversion. And the answers range from a high threat, which would earn you 50 points, or no data, which would earn you 0 points. And this is available to NRCS. We have data within our software to evaluate the threat of conversion. So again, I recommend reaching out to us. If you think that your project might be a good fit, we could kind of help see what threat scale it falls under. And then question 17 here, they added a ranking criteria about if the landowner is a historically underserved participant. And there are specific USDA NRCS defined criteria that identify what a historically underserved participant is, which is available on what's called the CPA 41A. So we'll talk about that document in a moment, but I recommend reaching out to NRCS Oregon with any questions about who falls within that category. So we'll talk about the state ranking criteria now. As I mentioned before, the IRA guidance allowed each state to develop state-specific ranking criteria not to exceed 125 points. So what NRCS Oregon did was take this guidance and develop 5 unique questions or criteria, which are featured on page 8 of that PDF under the resource section. I'll share that in just a moment. And again, this is a reminder that each of the criteria have been adapted to application questions featured on the parcel application packet. And for any instructions or guidance on how to answer these criteria, please see the parcel application packet. So the state ranking criteria, this is featured on the screenshot here. These are the 5 questions that this NRCS Oregon developed. And I do want to highlight 2 specific criteria that are, again, adapted to questions on the parcel application packet, but I just want to spell them out here a little bit more, given that I assume we will get questions about it. So the first one with the arrow pointing to it is the threat of grassland conversion to non-agricultural use. And what this criteria is focusing on is grassland conversion to any other use based on any development in the county or counties of application. So there will be a question on the packet that asks more specifically what, if any significant development has been occurring, and we would encourage a write-in, a yes or no, and then a write-in answer of any sort of description, whether that be kind of like solar arrays, golf courses, warehousing units, or data centers, these types of larger or expansion of the cities as well would also be considered kind of a larger development. The second question I want to highlight is new as well. This is regarding distance and proximity to an Oregon population center, which we are using data available from the Oregon Legislative Policy and Research Office. This is the cities and census designated places data, where you can download that data set, that shapefile, and measure how far your project boundary is from one of these population centers. So this is really the pause for questions and pause for specific IRA guidance. The remaining content is more focused on general ACEP-ALE, though it's still applicable to IRA. So I will pause for questions.
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
So currently, if I understand things correctly, the only way we can know if NRCS has identified a property as being at high risk of conversion is by talking to you, right?
That's from the best way I would suggest, yes.
And then is that data set that you use not sufficient for the state question in terms of risk of conversion for grasslands?
So the way that that question, yeah, in short, no, it's not sufficient enough as far as I understand. I could get some clarity on that. But really what the leadership, the NRCS Oregon leadership was concerned about was those um, kind of major developments that are not possibly captured on data sets like that. In particular, whether that is companies kind of purchasing land outright and that's not really captured in any sort of data. So it would be encouraged to kind of write that in on the application. And also, I would encourage to discuss with the NRCS basin team leaders as well regarding that concern. But you know how to reach me well enough too, so we can go over that in more detail.
Okay, thanks.
Nicole, you had your hand up, and then Wendy.
Yeah, kind of a related question to Mark's. That question about percent of ag land lost via the census. We had a weird thing happen here in Washington County where it did, kind of some unlikely data that we lost 23% from one 5-year period, and then we gained a bunch the next 5-year period. Will NRCS be looking at that like the 2022 census as compared to 2017, or more of a trend? So we might smooth some of that out.
The question, yeah, that's a good question. It is just looking at a comparison from the 2022 to the 2017, which unfortunately that doesn't sound like that would capture that general trend that you're describing. It would over a longer period of time.
Okay, thanks.
And then Wendy?
Yeah, my question was on one of your early slides, it was describing the kinds of lands that would be in the program. And it seemed to me that you had just two categories and they're both grasslands related. And I was just wondering, did I miss something? I would have thought there would be a category for just plain farmland. Or maybe I'm
Yeah,
eating.
no, that's a great question. I appreciate it because that's something that I'm not really focusing on today is like general program eligibility, which may be useful or not. So within the program, eligible lands could include a cropland, rangeland, grassland. There are several, I want to say 6 or so categories off the top of my head that the land use would be that the land would be eligible within the program guidelines. So it does include what you're suggesting there. These are just, those two areas were just priorities specific to IRA that a project would have to meet in order to qualify for that specific funding. All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat either, so I think I will continue along here unless anybody has anything to say. All right. Thanks for the questions there. So as I mentioned, this next section is general to ACEP-ALE overall, but it also applies to IRA ACEP-ALE. So we'll talk about submitting an application in a couple of different steps here. We'll talk about the required forms needed. So that includes a program agreement, if applicable. I'll talk about that more in a second, and a parcel application. And then there are also maps required and mapping elements that I'll describe. We'll talk about the Farm Service Agency landowner eligibility portions of the process that and FSA eligibility is also applies to all NRCS programs, so this is not necessarily specific to ALE. We'll talk a little bit about the process overview, and then we'll get to how to actually submit an application. So ACEP-ALE program agreements, these are, the program requires the use of program agreements and parcel contracts. Entities must have an active program agreement established before an individual parcel contract can be established. So that parcel contract is specific to the land that you're applying for. The program agreement, it sets out the responsibilities for NRCS and the eligible entity. There's no funding obligated through a program agreement. That comes through the parcel contract. And if you are unsure if your organization has an active program agreement or would like to get started, definitely contact the easements inbox there, specific to Oregon. So the ACEP-ALE program agreement required materials includes a number of things. One is a completed CPA 41 document. This is the kind of national standard application to determine if an entity is eligible. And that's available on the Oregon ACEP-ALE webpage. You need to provide proof of your nonprofit organization status. So there are a couple of things that could satisfy that, such as bylaws or Secretary of State filing. You also have to provide a proof of an established ag land protection program that purchases conservation easements. So that may be within a mission statement, some type of conservation plan, an annual report, or another document that would be sufficient as well. You should provide proof of System of Award Management, or SAM, registration that sets you up as a vendor with the federal government, and also provide your unique entity identifier, the UEI number associated with that registration. You should also provide proof of authority to purchase and hold ag conservation easements. So this would be a copy of Oregon revised statute numbers indicated there, and I provided the link as well. And proof of signature is also needed at the time, so that might be located in a couple different areas depending on your organization, whether that's bylaws, articles of incorporation, or meeting minutes as well. And then a proof of filing with the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, what's called a SKIMS subprint, should be obtained from your local FSA service center. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And I also want to highlight and highly recommend there are resources that NRCS has partnered with groups like the American Farmland Trust and Land Trust Alliance. I highly recommend the AFT Entity Toolkit that walks you through how to set up a program agreement and also apply for the ACEP-ALE program overall. And then they specifically have an entity eligibility checklist that you can go through and check off things that you've collected for submission for the program agreement. And the Land Trust Alliance also has specific documentation. They have a general entity toolkit similar to AFT, and then they have a CPA 41 walkthrough that kind of goes through each of the questions and helps explain what it's asking for. So once you have a program agreement established, then you can move on to parcel applications, which these applications determine the eligibility of the land, the landowner, and collect information to help NRCS rank the applications. Some of the required materials are a CPA 41A. This is this standard form that National uses. There is a specific Oregon FY25 IRA ACEP-ALE parcel application packet. We'll talk more about each of these in a moment, and then there will also be supplemental documentation described on the following slides. And again, similar to program agreements and entity eligibility, there is lots of information from both AFT and LTA, again, including their general toolkits, but then they also have some specific instructions for completing the 41A. So as I mentioned, the 41A is the standard national application form used for all ACEP-ALE transaction types. And I want to highlight some tips and tricks. There's just a screenshot of the first page here on the right. It's about 6 or so pages, I think, off the top of my head. And these are some tips and tricks to help you fill out as you go through, is to first make sure to select the correct enrollment and transaction types. So that's located in section A there. I would also recommend to select the correct land eligibility category. So that gets to there are 4 land eligibility that any ACEP-ALE project must meet, located on the application. And there, I would also recommend providing accurate easement acreage to the best of your ability. And if you're enrolling the entire parcel that the landowner owns, I would encourage ensuring acreages match the FSA records, as sometimes that can cause a discrepancy during the application process. Also, please provide location coordinates within the proposed easement area. Try to stay off the edge or in a corner if there could be one in the middle of a parcel located within the easement is great. And when it comes to easement value, please provide the best estimate of easement value. And of course, within reason, if there's not an appraisal, it's recommended to overestimate to avoid any future contract modifications. And that's because it's easy for NRCS to return excess funds, but it's difficult for NRCS to obtain additional funds. So for example, if the appraisal came in at 900,000 or at $1 million, but you put on the application, we've been running on the assumption of, or the estimate of 900,000, it would be difficult. It would be a process, I guess, to obtain that additional $100,000 there. So let's talk about the parcel application packet. We just talked about the 41A. The application packet collects information to determine eligibility and help NRCS Oregon rank the application. It will, the packet for IRA will be posted on the ACEP webpage soon. So I recommend currently to use the fiscal year 24 ACEP-ALE packet as a draft, as there will be only a few questions, should be a little bit different on the IRA packet. So the contents within this packet include an introduction letter, just describing the program and the process a bit. It includes an application checklist, so that outlines the forms needed and information needed for a complete application. And it also provides a naming convention to help establish some consistency across documents. And then the meat of it is a parcel questionnaire. So there's roughly 70 to 80 questions. And the applicant, you wouldn't answer all 80 depending on which questions you say yes or no to. So hopefully that doesn't sound too daunting right now, but it depends on what questions you answer. That determines how many questions you complete in total. And then there are multiple appendices that will be attached, including how to submit, which we'll talk about soon. Some definitions, how to use web soil survey, and some more that I've been able to add this year. So moving on to supplemental required documentation, this information is located on the checklist within the parcel application packet. And again, you can use the fiscal year 24 ACEP-ALE packet as a reference for now. Required to include with the a complete packet is the recorded vesting deeds that covers the entire proposed easement area, the evidence of an active SAM registration, the title commitment or preliminary title commitment for initial NRCS land eligibility review. Should also provide a written pending offer to purchase the easement from the landowner. And should provide a current delegation of authority or signature, and signature authority documents for your organization. The GIS shapefile of the proposed easement boundaries should also be submitted. And then we have maps, which the maps require a little bit more spelling out here. You can provide PDFs. GIS shapefiles are appreciated but not necessarily needed. And descriptions of each map are provided on that checklist, as I mentioned above. And I'll go through them a little bit slowly here, because the first one, we have the proposed boundary and axis. This is something that NRCS's Oregon is hoping to be more proactive about, is that if there is any access that is not accessible fully from a public road or a landowner's private road, please inform NRCS Oregon, as other roads, specifically federally managed roads like the U.S. Forest Service, and other private roads may need NRCS approval of alternative legal access. And so we can get that conversation started early to kind of get over any hurdles early on. And then there are several other maps here, including land eligibility, the farmland classification, which that comes from Web Soil Survey, the agricultural viability that relates to access to markets, and also nearby protected lands, development pressure, and then any at-risk species would be ideal as well. So mapping requirements, this is relatively new for Oregon, and we're still kind of working through the best way to receive consistent maps, and also just establish kind of a baseline for what's needed for maps. So we currently work with the Easement Acquisitions branch. They review all of our ALE applications. This is a national level branch, as we do not have any realty specialists on staff. And the EAB has developed mapping guidance to provide consistent service. And this guidance will be included on the application packet as an appendix. And I'm happy to share, I'll be sharing some screenshots of it here as well, but happy to share it out if you need before the packet is ready as well. And I just recommend to follow this mapping guidance on all maps to establish consistency, and as they are a communication tool, and being able to identify where things are at consistently would be helpful between EAB and NRCS Oregon. So this is the screenshot of the appendix that will be featured. There is some like introductory text that's cut off here that just didn't fit on the slide. So the left is a checklist of what should be included on a map. And then the right is an example map that they've provided, that EAB has provided. So any questions, feel free to reach out to NRCS staff. I'm going to give a bit of a disclaimer to start off with the Farm Service Agency side of things. This pertains to landowner eligibility. I highly recommend consulting your local FSA service center for any assistance with this side of the application. I do not work for FSA. I'm not an FSA expert, though I am trying to learn quickly of what are some of the hurdles that might come up with the Farm Service Agency side of the house. So if you're having any questions or issues with getting in touch with the local FSA office or working through those eligibility paperwork, you're welcome to contact NRCS staff, and we may be able to assist. So the general overview is that all producers and or entities, whether that's some kind of trust, a farm business, LLC, must have FSA records established, and they must meet eligibility requirements that I'll talk about in the next bullet. So the paperwork includes what's called a CCC 902, or the Farm Operating Plan. There could also be a 901 applicable. This is applicable to landowners that are entities, so not an individual. They would not fill out this form. The CCC 941 refers to the adjusted gross income certification, and this has to be completed annually for most NRCS programs after October 1, which is that fiscal year date, as their AGI has to be determined eligible within the same fiscal year that you are applying for ACEP-ALE for, or any NRCS program. And then another document is called the AD 1026. This refers to highly erodible land and wetland compliance certification. And each of these records and producer eligibility paperwork should be on file and loaded into the system by close of business day on the application deadline. So applications may be ineligible if this does not occur. So if you're having any trouble understanding landowner eligibility or getting in touch with local FSA, you can contact NRCS Oregon, or you can also refer to the resources available from American Farmland Trust and Land Trust Alliance as well. So I wanted to feature this process for those that are unfamiliar with the program or are looking to apply for the first time sometime soon. This simplified process, I would not recommend that this is accurate for where you're at now. If you're on step 1 here, I would say you're probably ready to apply next year or the year after that, given that this could be a longer period of time. So if you're just doing that initial kind of outreach with a landowner, that is a time to determine if they're comfortable working with NRCS, with USDA, ensuring that they're willing to live with the permanent restriction on their property, and also determine whether the property meets basic eligibility criteria. Then you would move on to digging into some of that due diligence paperwork on the property deed and title to determine what's any flags there or complications. And I would recommend at this stage, if you are seeing that it is a good fit for ACEP-ALE, and if you don't have a program agreement established, this would be a good time to establish that program agreement. And then from there, you would continue on over a period of time of coordinating any farm service agency, eligibility forms, filling out the application packets, and completing any supplemental documentation, and then eventually submitting an application. So now you're ready to submit an application. Let's talk about what is needed. So the first option is preferred and also newly available for Oregon. This is in order to try to bring us up to the 21st century, you can do an electronic upload via box. This is similar to what would be like a Google Drive. And you can contact the NRCS team to request a box folder for your organization. That will be specific between NRCS and your organization. There's no other open access to that folder. And the option 2 is to email your application to the NRCS inbox, easements inbox there. And there's detailed instructions on how to do either of these steps are options on the parcel application packet appendice. Great. All right. Resources available. Primarily, you have staff available to assist you. I would say I'm kind of the first line of defense, including Eric Mokenberg, my supervisor. So I help with all aspects of ACEP-ALE, and my supervisor helps with or runs ACEP-ALE and the WRE side of the program, the wetland reserve easements. And Aaron Kaczmarczyk oversees all of the Farm Bill conservation programs, and including ACEP program. Also want to shout out the Land Trust Alliance. They have a new NRCS conservation acquisitions team, which those are staff dedicated to assisting entities with one-on-one assistance on all aspects of the NRCS application process. They are currently prioritizing land trusts or groups with minimal experience with NRCS programs, whether that is at the individual staff level or as an organization. And you can submit a request for their services at the link there. And I'd recommend, if you haven't heard back, you can contact myself or Josh Holmes at LTA directly. He's based in Idaho and will ideally be working with Western applicants to the program. And we're in close contact as well. So you can reach out to either of us to receive this type of assistance. And there are, of course, as I mentioned throughout this presentation, there's online and print materials available. All those toolkits are linked again here, and our Oregon-specific ACEP-ALE webpage. And that is all that I have. I think I'm good on time. Question and answer can happen now, but I just want to give a quick reminder that your entities are encouraged to discuss projects before applying with NRCS to assess fit and identify any potential flags or issues. This will help us kind of pinpoint any solutions early on as well, so that we can have a more seamless application process. So thanks very much for your time and listening here, and I'll turn it over to any questions. I see some hands. I think Mark is first, at least that's how it's showing up on my screen.
Yeah, I think too, besides talking to you about general eligibility for the IRA funding, Matt, there's a few data items which are always pretty hard for me to get, like the farm and tract number and that kind of stuff. I think it would just, not having seen that in the application, anybody interested in applying, I would also encourage you to get that from Matt, because it's an internal FSA number you can't find yourself.
Gotcha. Thanks for calling that out. Yeah, so Mark's referring to farm and tract numbers, which are established through FSA. And those are available on what's called a subsidiary print that FSA should provide the land trust entity with in setting up that eligibility. But also we can pull those subsidiary prints on our end as well to identify those numbers for you and any information needed on the FSA side. Lindy, I see your hand up.
Hi there, thank you. I'm curious about allocation of funding for, say, a purchase conservation easement on a property that might be a matrix of forest land and grassland, and say it's 300 acres and only 100 acres of it would be in the grassland agricultural land category. Would that be eligible? And then would there be sort of a proportional funding available?
That's a good question. And to kind of broadcast again, I didn't really share much about regular eligibility for the program outside of the IRA priorities here. So I apologize that that information was not in this application, in this workshop. But so off the top of my head, it sounds per policy, ACEP-ALE allows for up to 2/3 of the easement area to be forested. So I think that sounds proportionate from what you're describing. We'd have to, of course, look more specifically at the application and the land and the project, of course. So yeah, happy to discuss that further, but it's up to 2/3 of the property, or forest land cannot exceed up to 2/3 of the offered easement area. And Wendy, I see a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. My question has to do with an aspect of readiness, or what kind of agreement has to be in place for the landowner. And you referred to a written pending offer to purchase. So that's just the offer. There doesn't have to be any completed, say, option or purchase and sale agreement for the easement. Is that correct?
That is correct from what I'm aware of. I see Mark nodding as well. I'm still relatively new, so that's something I'm a little unfamiliar with, but I would say that's correct.
And I'm curious at what time that is required. It sounds like, Mark, if you know, that would be handy to
It's
hear.
required application, so you have to have it there by deadline. But the form we use, which we've used multiple times, and it's passed muster, haven't gotten any comments on it. It's just a 1-page confirmation that, hey, we have an interest in buying conservation easement on the land described on the map on the attachment. One thing I think that is important to know, and Matt will discuss this too, I mentioned the farm and tract number. You should also see what acreage that they have in their NRCS system. because if you pull a different acreage out, it's just going to get rejected. So you always want to use their acreage. I don't even write the acreage on anything. I just stick a map on there. Just say we're all agreeing we're buying a conservation easement on the land attached to the map for this amount of money, assuming that we receive full funds. It's not contractual. It says that it's non-binding right in it, and they sign it. And that's all you really has to be.
Is there a point in the process to the closing of the conservation easement where you have to end up with a firm commitment, or you just move straight to the point where the conservation easement is in fact transferred?
It doesn't say in rule that you have to have done a PSA kind of thing, but I will note that it seems to be an expectation from the review staff that you have some kind of contract document prior to close, because before they release the funding, there's a pretty intense review from the NRCS national headquarters staff. And in the context of that review, they're going to be wanting to review contract items to understand, hey, if we're sending money, are there terms for how that money was sent? Are all the requirements of the grant reflected in the purchase and sale agreement, that kind of stuff. Because they review everything prior to closing, but they're probably going to want to see that those documents also have to show up at closing. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So my question was, a lot of what you just said could be in the conservation easement itself, which would be reviewed ahead of time. I'm interested in the pathway from that letter of that you described, the written pending offer to the actual closing date, and if there has to be some kind of signed binding contract.
Yeah, there's a purchase and sale agreement. It doesn't explicitly say you have to in the rules, but I don't know how you would do it otherwise. So we do a PSA after we've gotten our NRCS and usually our OAHP or whatever our match funding is. We put the landowner under purchase and sale agreement, and then you kind of have to too, because the other thing I think that's important to note is NRCS does not guarantee review prior of all the closing packet items faster than 6 months prior to releasing funding. So you probably want some kind of contract agreement just to hold the landowner in place during that time period.
Okay, thanks so much.
I will say we've got it in 3 months, but they won't guarantee it faster than 6 months.
Thanks, Mark. That's helpful, especially as I'm not totally familiar with that side of the process yet. So, and mostly focusing on application processing. I'm just checking the chat. I don't think I see any other questions or hands raised.
I have one more. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm gonna hold us too late.
Not at all.
I know the NRCS does not release public information, but that said, often with the grant program, you're able to see what kind of things competed well in the past, what was awarded. Is that the case for this program? Is there a place we could look at that information, or is that something that the land trust community could share amongst ourselves if we were curious?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's nothing currently, as far as I'm aware, nothing publicly available online. Mark, you have your hand up?
So a lot of the application material is protected information because there's social security numbers and a whole bunch of other stuff, which is FOIA protected information associated with that. However, NRCS did do an agreement years ago that said that any easements that they close upon will go into the National Conservation Easement Database. So they're all should be in there. And from there, we should be able to kind of figure out who's done what in Oregon, kind of thing. Because it types them by whether or not they were WRE, or it says NRCS and like NRCS held versus an entity held easement, and names the entity that's holding them.
Yes, I could pull that link. I forgot about that one because I feel like it has some holes in it. Do you remember looking at that, Mark? And it just
Well,
does
I
not
said they're supposed to update it. The time frame is not necessarily consistent. I will say though, too, Nicole, there's not been a lot of ALEs done in Oregon. I think when we looked into it, it was like 8, and some of them are pretty old. I i.e. even pre-ACEP, whatever FRPPP, the predecessor program. So we don't have a lot of demonstrated success in the state, but we can also look out of state too.
Thanks.
For sure, yeah. Wendy?
I have these technical questions. I'm gonna float it anyway. In terms of the mapping, when you're showing like if there's a reserved residence area, like a building envelope, in terms of utilities and roads and protecting not just the building envelope, but ways to access it and put utilities to that residence that can go in the building envelope, do people usually do the mapping showing like a handle out to an access road? How do they protect the access in the mapping? Where they're making the application, but they want to show that they will be putting a road and utilities in to the building envelope.
Mhm.
And apologies for the technicality of that question. Maybe it's not right for this presentation.
No, that's good, and that's something that has come up recently. So are you saying with establishing a building envelope that would identify future construction, and then how do you identify future utilities and other infrastructure to that?
Yeah, so you have undeveloped land and there you have a building envelope that will be permitted as part of the conservation easement, but there needs to be a road and utilities to that. How do people usually just map like, like a panhandle kind of arrangement, or how do people protect that?
That's a good question. I see Marcus shaking. I don't think I have gotten to that process yet. Um, in the ALE acquisition phase. So Mark, did you have anything to add?
I had two things. First off, it's important that you have all the maps named done at application time. I have never not had at least one of my maps rejected by EAB and told to redo them. So after application. So basically, if you're ranked and accepted, or these guys can't understand the map, they are allowed after the fact to ask for amendments and fixes and stuff like that. So you need to get it done. It needs to be in, but I don't want to say you can change things materially, but if things aren't clear, that's okay. But the other thing I was going to say is the way the minimum deed terms for ACEP work, you're not required to name where services to the building envelopes specifically will be. They just have to fit within either the impervious service limits, if, for example, it's going to be a paved road, or avoid any protected areas under the conservation easement. And so long as you are going to have to name the protected areas and the building envelopes, right? So long as what you've done, those building envelopes and protected areas allow you for your adequate ingress egress somewhere along there, you're fine. That can be something can be done via a notice and approval process way after the easement's even done, if the house isn't already constructed.
So you're saying you have to ask for approval later, but
it's not even approval in our easements, it's just notice.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. I think we're almost at time here. Carson, do you have anything that you'd like to add, or?
No, I think I'm good. Just thank you, Matt, for walking through all of that. Like he mentioned at the top of the presentation, we will be recording and putting this on the website to refer back to. So keep an eye out for that, and please feel free to reach out to Matt with any specific questions or follow-up.
Yes. Yeah, definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. I do have 2 email addresses. I'll see it either way it comes in. So just let me know if you have any questions. And thanks again so much for your time.